So today we start with a new topic, that's mapped elements. Mapped elements is a generic term uh, referring to three possible types of parametric mapping, but in practice we often use one of the three, that is isoparametric mapping. So isoparametric elements were developed by Bruce Irons in while he was working in University of Wales at Swansea, and it is these isoparametric elements that has actually led to the tremendous growth in finite element technology. It opened up new vistas, and several new applications were found and successfully implemented by using isoparametric formulation. And Bruce Irons himself was a very interesting character. He was an engineer with Rolls-Royce and he came to University of Wales for pursuing his PhD doctorate at the age of 50, and subsequently after completing his PhD he joined academia and went on to guide 20 PhDs. A very interesting person and a very gifted person, I would say. And much of what we know about finite elements, the way we use it, owes its origin to Bruce Irons. There is a He has authored several books. Two of them, Finite Elements, a Primer, reads like a bedtime stories, and the other one, Techniques of Finite Elements, is at the other end of the spectrum. It is very difficult to read and very philosophical and very very comprehensive. So if you ever get a chance to read that book, uh, please do try to uh, go through it, and I'm sure you would learn quite a lot. I mean, much more than what we have covered in this course. So let's start. I mean, what is this mapped elements all about? I'm skipping the discussion of three-dimensional elements. They are exactly identical, just one more dimension than the two-dimensional elements that we have discussed. So you can actually pick up, there is nothing new in that, and you can pick it up by your own, on your own, going through the discussions in the books that I have provided. Right? So first of all, we need to understand that whatever we have done so far in the name of finite elements, essentially the idea has always been from the beginning that uh, arbitrary geometry is difficult to model in analysis, and our analytical methods are limited by the regularity of geometry, the Cartesian frame or whatever frame of reference. If elements are aligned accordingly, then it is easier to evaluate. And that is how the concept of finite element method developed has evolved, in the sense that we can divide uh, any arbitrary domain by an assembly of smaller regular size elements, straight edge elements. So we are not looking at curved geometries I mean, whatever we have, the elements are all straight edge elements and are very regular shape, regular triangle, regular rectangle, regular tetrahedron, regular prisms, and so on, right? Which have very well defined geometry, and that is how it becomes easier to evaluate the domain integrals over individual elements, and then we assemble them together and get the total system of equations representing the whole domain. Now, obviously, that has worked very well in practice, but there are limitations to what we can do, and there is a problem in modeling of the domain as such, because a straight edge element, a triangle with straight sides, obviously cannot model the curved geometry. So there is a part of the domain that is left unrepresented, and that uh, discretization error, that unrepresented part of the domain is known as discretization error, and that is completely left out from consideration of the problem. Right? So you may be able to appreciate it by this example. So just to reiterate, finite element method facilitates modeling of arbitrarily complex domains by an assembly of small elements of regular geometric shapes with straight edge or plane surfaces for the three-dimensional domains. Curved geometries, if there are any curved geometries, they may be modeled by using a large number of small size elements. So a curve can be modeled by a straight line if you are looking at a very small portion of it. And this leads to obviously an increase in problem size, because if you are forced to use a small size element, then obviously you need more number of elements and therefore more number of nodes and more number of variables to model the problem. So development of finite elements with curved boundaries is based on the mathematical concept of parametric mapping. We will rejig this your memory. What is this parametric mapping in a short while? But just let us try to understand what we have said so far. So a quadrant of a circle, if I discretize it by using triangular elements, let's say I use 7 elements to model this quadrant of a circle, right? So total 8 nodes and 7 elements, and you can see that this straight edge element leaves out this portion. Whatever is between this circle arc and the straight edge of the triangle. So this is completely left out of consideration of the finite element model. Finite element model can only represent what is covered by the finite elements. Now this is what we call as discretization error. I can reduce this discretization error by using smaller elements. So more number of elements in the domain. So you can see that discretization error can be reduced by using smaller size elements, but then in the process we have changed the problem from, going from total 8 number of nodes to about uh, how many? 18 elements and about 16 nodes, right? So about 16 nodes are here, so almost double the problem size, right? So this way, and this is a very trivial example. The problem can actually blow out of hands very quickly. if we try to reduce the discretization error just by using finer finite element mesh. So what is the solution? I mean, is there any other way of reducing the discretization error and still retain the basic advantage of finite element method, that is, it allows us to work with a very regular and simple geometry, right? So we would like to retain, let us be very clear, we are not going to give up the advantage and convenience that we have grown to grown used to, that is the regular geometry, very well behaved and according to our chosen frame of reference, the variables are very well defined and it's the domain integrals are very amenable to easy integration, easy computation. So that is first thing, that we will not like to forego the convenience of the use of regular geometry, and but at the same time we would like to have some mechanism, if possible, to reduce the discretization error, and in that sense we make use of parametric mapping, concept of parametric mapping. So now what do we mean by parametric mapping? We all know the parametric formula for various geometries. For example, ellipse is given by a parameter, can be defined by a parameter t ranging from 0 to 2 pi, right? And a and b are the semi-major and semi-minor axes. So as t ranges from 0 to 2 pi, the coordinates of the points, locus of ellipse, are given by a sine t and b cos t, right? So the coordinates of the points will be very simple. So a sine t and b cos t, and that is how as t, and all that we need to do now is we keep on varying t from 0 to 2 pi and the entire ellipse will be traced out. And similarly this also works for I mean, if a is equal to b, then it also works for a circle actually, right? And parametric form of parabola is given by x is equal to at square and y is equal to twice at. Again t ranging from this range. So this way you can, I mean, the whole idea is you have a very powerful technique. I mean, you all are familiar with this concept of parametric mapping. I mean, parametric form of various curves. That was what you probably might have studied in your coordinate geometry course in high school. So that concept can be used for generating any arbitrary curve. So by giving this parametric variation within certain range, we can actually generate arbitrary curves and surfaces for modeling of complex domains by finite elements. Essentially, what are we doing in finite elements? We are trying to model the surfaces at the domains, which are essentially areas or surfaces, and bounded by certain bounding curves or surfaces, right? So, and if those bounding curves are some arbitrary curves, then we can generate those bounding curves by some parametric mapping, and that allows us a known parametric function, and that allows us to relate and develop the fit the entire description within the framework of finite element formulation. So how it is exactly done? Let's work out a little bit more. So what we are trying to do here is, as I said, we are not going to give up the advantage that we have gained in the use of by the use of regular geometric shapes, and that we call as parent elements of different shapes such as triangle, rectangle, tetrahedron, hexahedron, and so on. And we take these regular geometries and we distort them, we map them onto desired shape, that is, and we call this as element distortion, right? And for this we make use of what we call as local or natural coordinate system, or even curvilinear coordinate system, if you may. Right? We will come to that in just a while. Right? So what happens here is, while I deal with the elements, parent elements within the local geometry, the regular shape, but while mapping onto the domain representation, I have the additional flexibility of transforming these formulations of regular geometry onto a distorted geometry by using predetermined mapping, predetermined way of transformation. Right? And it's a mathematical transformation. So it is a very, very well defined one-to-one mapping. So while I work the entire equations within the framework of regular geometry, but I use the compute transforms and the whatever complexities, mathematical complexities, I leave it to computer. But those equations that I develop for the regular geometry of the element, they can be transformed to correspond to the arbitrary shape that we wish to map or model by using mathematical parametric mapping. Right? And the way we do it is similar to this parametric formulation. Now, uh, because we already have one model of approximation, that is approximation of the field variable in terms of uh, interpolation as of primary variables. So we also define the geometry of distortion. So distorted geometry, so one element, regular element distorted to some other shape by using interpolation of the coordinates of certain points. So in the physical space, I have certain points where these nodes of the finite element have to be placed, right? So that gives us, this is a parametric variation. If I have certain number of points whose coordinates are known, and then I interpolate between these points, and that gives us the variation of x, y, and z coordinates as a function of these parameters xi, eta, zeta in three-dimensional space. Right? So it is something similar to the parametric mapping that we already know. In this case, we had only one parameter to vary. In this case, we have three parameters to vary, and that defines the geometrical coordinates of any point, how it varies in these with respect to these parameters. Now these parameters we vary in between -1 to +1. So xi has a range of -1 to +1, eta has a range of -1 to +1, zeta has a range of -1 to +1. Right? So just example of element distortion. So we have this three nodes whose coordinates are given in case of xi local coordinate system, parameter xi. So node 1 has a coordinate in xi system as -1, node 2 is the midpoint, that is coordinate 0, and node 3 has the coordinate of 1. And I decide that node 1 has to take position here in the physical space. This is the coordinate. Let's say I define this coordinate as x1, and node 2 has a coordinate x2, whatever value of x2, and node 3 has a coordinate x3, right? And the variation of x with respect to xi is given as the interpolation of between these coordinates of node 1, 2 and 3. So in between, as xi ranges from minus 1, as I vary xi from minus 1 to plus 1, I get variation of x as a continuous function of xi, and it agrees with the coordinates, I mean the specified coordinates of these three nodes. So coordinate of node 1 is mapped onto x1, node 2 is mapped onto x2, and node 3 is mapped onto x3. And in terms of x1, x2 and x3, I get a continuous variation of x with respect to xi. So that is what we have parametric mapping with respect to xi in one dimensional case. In two dimensional case, I can distort this regular rectangle or a square into any arbitrary shaped uh, quadrilateral. It can be, this is what we call as bilinear distortion. It is a linear distortion with respect to xi and linear with respect to eta. It can also have been, it could have been quadratic as well, because these are all, this is a quadratic function. So interpolations are capable of representing quadratic. So this is a distortion of a rectangle, regular rectangle into a quadrilateral, arbitrary quadrilateral, and as xi and eta vary from minus 1 to plus 1, each point in this regular rectangle is mapped onto a corresponding point in this arbitrary shaped quadrilateral, right? And this is defined by the interpolation between these four corner nodes. I mean, four corner nodes are enough, are used to define the bilinear mapping. So the geometry is defined by these nodes, which are enclosed by the squares, and the field variation, that is displaced. Let's say we are dealing with elasticity problems. So the displacements, variation of displacement within the element is defined by these field nodes indicated by the field circles, right? So this is a class of elements which we call as subparametric variation, because the geometry variation is of lower order than the variation of the field variable, right? So field variable has a higher degree of parametric variation than the geometry. So that is called subparametric. Here it is isoparametric. We use the same variation for both interpolation of the field variable within the element as well as for the geometry. And for three-dimensional domain, this 8-node cube is mapped onto a any arbitrary three-dimensional volume with irregular shape, any irregular shape, right? So again, this is isoparametric. All the nodes which are used for definition of variable variation of displacements, they are also used for the definition of this distortion or mapping of the geometry, right? So this is the basic idea of how we use regular elements, regular geometry elements to model arbitrary deformed geometries, arbitrarily shaped geometries. Now this can be, this opens up new vistas, and it's limited only by our imagination, subject to certain sanity checks, so to say. So we come to isoparametric. Isoparametric, when we call it a degree of parametric mapping for geometry, is same as that of the degree of interpolation of primary variable within the element. So if the primary variable is second degree complete, then if we use a parametric quadratic mapping for the geometry, then it is called isoparametric. So this, in that case, we will be using the same interpolation functions for displacements as well as for the geometry, and that makes life much simpler, right? And subparametric, which requires geometry to be interpolated to a lower degree than the primary variable, that is already contained in isoparametric. We just use the interpolated value for the intermediate nodes, and subparametric variation can always be covered by isoparametric variation. So interpolation functions for polynomial approximation of primary variables are also used to define the element geometry. So one class of functions that if you take care, then it takes care of all your requirements. Geometry of regular parent elements is defined by the lines or planes bounded by these local coordinates xi, eta, zeta in the range -1 to +1, and this regular geometry is mapped to desired distorted shapes by using the coordinates of the points which define these distorted shapes. So the nodes are uh, assigned to those different points. So what are the restrictions on element distortions for not compromising convergence of finite element solution? This is what I referred to as subjected to certain sanity checks. So what are the restrictions that we need to observe? First thing, I mean, these are all very logical. Neighboring elements should share contiguous boundaries. So although we know regular elements, they are straight edge elements, and we divide the mesh by using regular elements, so there is no problem with the contiguity or uh, any part, any element overlapping over the next element, or there some void maybe is left out. So there is no such problem with domain decomposition or finite element mesh discretization using regular elements. But that continuity, that contiguity, that the element boundaries should remain in touch, constant in touch. I mean, they should share all points. The neighboring elements should share all points with each other at the boundary. That property should also hold after the transformation. Individual elements are distorted independently. So whatever element 1 is being distorted to, element 2, that is the next element, that has its own distortion. So after distortion, also we should not have any problem of overlapping or voids between the elements, right? So that is the first requirement. Then the continuity of the primary variable across the element boundaries, that should be preserved even in the distorted domain. Of course, the interpolation that we have so carefully chosen in the parent element. So in this case, parent element will be defined by xi, eta and zeta coordinates limited in the range -1 to +1. So the continuity across element boundaries in these parent elements should be carried over to the distorted domains. So that also needs to be ensured. And third one is the completeness of interpolated field in the distorted domain. So whatever happens, I mean that rigid body representation and the constant strain states, that should always be satisfied even in the case of distorted domains. So we construct the interpolation functions for parent element, but do these conditions carry over after distortion? So that needs to be proved, and conditions, limits to be imposed, that this is what needs to be done, and then these three basic requirements would be satisfied. So we first come to the geometric compatibility of elements. So modeling of continuous domains should be preserved during and after distortion. So a domain which is a problem domain which is continuously varying should we have no reason to create any voids or any kind of misrepresentation after the distortion that would completely invalidate the analysis. So the parametric variation of geometry at the interface of two adjacent elements should be identical when approached from either side. So this continuity problem is easily answered when I look at it from the perspective of geometry that has been that needs to be modeled. So in this curved geometry, the variation that I get, parametric variation that I get from element 1, I mean this geometry which is shared between two elements. So this geometry variation that I get from element 1, if this variation is exactly identical with the one I get from the adjacent element, right? Because the geometry mapping is done element by element. So whatever is being done in element 1 is independent of whatever is being done in element 2. But if the variation that I get in the shared side or whatever the inter-element boundary is shared by these two elements, element 1 and element 2. So if I consider the geometry variation from element looking at the mapping from element 1, if this mapping is exactly identical with the mapping that I obtain while working with element number 2, then obviously the uh, continuity of the geometry is preserved. So this is essentially same thing as preserving the interpolation of primary variable from either elements. And in isoparametric, if we use the same interpolation functions for modeling of geometry as we do for the modeling of primary variables, then of course this condition is satisfied. So if two adjacent elements are generated from parents in which the shape functions satisfy C0 continuity requirements, then the distorted elements will be contiguous. Right? So this is what in a two-dimensional model. So xi eta coordinates. So this is 8-node serendipity element, and this is mapped onto, for one element this is mapped onto this variation, and the another geometry for the next element, this regular shape is mapped onto this. Now on this shared node, on this shared edge, this boundary which is shared between the two elements, so whatever is the variation, this variation corresponds to xi is equal to 1. So these nodes, right? So these 3 points, these 3 nodes on this geometry, they uniquely define a quadratic variation, right? 3 points, so they will define a quadratic variation, and these interpolation, they are complete in quadratic. So whatever I do here, a quadratic variation is uniquely defined, and similarly when I approach it from element E, I get one quadratic variation using these 3 nodes, and when I approach this edge from element E plus 1, I get the same quadratic variation while using these 3 nodes, and therefore the variation of uh, x and y as a function of xi and eta is unique in this, along this edge, right? Because x is defined as the same function of xi and eta as I approach from element E at this point, and same variation for x and y is obtained as I approach this edge from element number E plus 1, right? And as long as the same variation of x and y is obtained, so the continuity is obviously maintained. So if the interpolation functions that I use for the geometry mapping, if the interpolation functions satisfy the C0 continuity criteria, then obviously there is no reason if x is interpolated using the same interpolation functions, then the value of x along this curve is going to be same whether I evaluate it from this element or from this element. Similarly, value of y along this curve is going to be same irrespective of whether I evaluate it from this element or from this element. And once x and y are identical, variation of x and y are identical, then obviously the compatibility will be, geometric compatibility of distorted elements will be assured. So continuity and completeness of the approximation, the primary variable of the interpolation. So for moderate distortions of the domain, there exists a one-to-one correspondence between each point in the regular domain of a parent element to a point in the distorted domain. Right? So the key word here is the moderate distortions. For very severe distortion, we may run into a problem of non-uniqueness. So as long as there is a unique one-to-one correspondence between a point in the regular domain, parent element, to a point in the distorted domain, then uh, we have no issues. The polynomial variation of the primary variables along the interface of the adjacent elements will be identical and hence compatible and continuous for both neighboring elements if the interpolation functions satisfy C0 continuity requirements in regular parent element. So again, argument goes in the same fashion as we discussed for the geometry. In this case, we are now talking about the approximation of the primary variables. So if the shape functions Ni are such that C0 continuity of primary variable is preserved in the parent element, then C0 continuity requirement will be satisfied in the distorted elements as well, provided the distortion is moderate and it ensures a one-to-one correspondence between each point in the regular domain to a point in distorted domain. Right? So the interpolated field for displacement, the completeness requirement is it should have a rigid body motion and it should have constant strain states. So then it essentially implies that the displacement field should be complete at least up to linear term for ensuring convergence. And linear term is given by uh, a0 plus a1x plus a2y. So let's say it's displacement along x is given by a0 plus a1x plus a2y. So for isoparametric mapping, we can replace x as an interpolation of the coordinates of x nodes. So say x is equal to sigma ni xi and y is equal to again sigma ni xi. And if we substitute it here, then we have this relationship a0 plus a1 sigma ni xi plus a2 sigma ni yi. So what does it give? Now we also look at what is the interpolation model. So the primary variable at node I, any node I, will be given by ui is equal to, if I substitute, if I evaluate the primary variable at node I, then I should be getting ui is equal to a0 plus a1 xi plus a2 yi, right? So this can be substituted in the approximation of the primary variable. So that is u that is given by ni ui sigma ni ui. So I just get it ui, replace it and plug it in the approximation primary variable. So u as an interpolation model is given as sigma ni ui and ui is replaced by the variation evaluated at xi yi, right? So when I use this, expand this, so this gives me the expression A0 multiplied by sigma Ni, collect all the terms, A1 multiplied by sigma Ni xi plus A2 sigma Ni yi. Now if I compare these two, then we can establish the requirement that this completeness of approximation will be satisfied provided the interpolation functions of the element, they add up to unity, and this is called the partition of unity concept. So the interpolation of the nodes for of sum of interpolation functions corresponding to all nodes of the element, they should all add up to unity, right? Sigma Ni should be equal to 1. That is the basic requirement for ensuring the completeness of the polynomial variation in the distorted domains. And by the way, this is also the requirement that is essential for ensuring that rigid body modes exist in the undistorted interpolation model, in the undistorted field. So this would anyway be true if we have constructed interpolation functions correctly, right? So the whole point is this isoparametric mapping does not require uh, anything extra than what we already have, except that the distortions have to be moderate. We should not be too greedy. So that takes care of the geometry part, but now the problem comes is the equation, the governing differential equations, they are defined in terms of the Cartesian dot derivatives. So the strains, they are defined, they are the partial derivatives with respect to x, y and z, or maybe cylindrical coordinates or spherical coordinates, whichever coordinate system you choose. And now our variation, primary variable, etc., they are all defined in terms of local coordinates, xi, eta, zeta. And we have, obviously, we have some relationship between xi, eta, zeta and the Cartesian coordinates x, y and z through the parametric mapping. X, y, z are defined as interpolation in terms of xi, eta, zeta. So we do have some relationship. But the problem is, while we can compute the derivatives with respect to xi, eta, zeta, what we need in equilibrium equation is the derivatives with respect to x, y and z. So the formulation of finite element equilibrium equation requires evaluation of domain integrals where the integrands are functions of Cartesian derivatives of the primary variables. While evaluation of these integrals in the case of distorted domains poses a minor problem because the interpolated field of primary variable is defined in terms of local coordinates, that is xi, eta and zeta, instead of Cartesian coordinates. Cartesian coordinates are now oriented anywhere. The geometry is distorted in terms of x, y and z. So interpolations obviously work only in the regular geometry. So interpolations are defined in terms of regular parent element xi, eta, zeta. So sigma ni, ui, ni functions of xi, eta, zeta, local coordinates varying between -1 to +1. And the geometry in Cartesian coordinates is also interpolated in terms of local coordinates. So x is given as sigma xi ni, y is given as sigma yi ni, and z is given as sigma zi ni. Right? So we need to somehow find a way of putting these two sets of information together and try to find the information that is relevant for us, that is Cartesian derivatives of the primary variables. So since the Cartesian coordinates are defined in parametric form, total derivatives with respect to local coordinates can be defined as del over del xi is given as del x over del xi multiplied by del over del x, del y over del xi multiplied by del over del y, del z over del xi multiplied by del over del z. Right? So that is the total derivative with respect to xi. Similarly for eta, because all x, y and z, they vary with respect to each of these local coordinates. So x varies with xi, so we have this variation, y varies with xi, we have this variation, z varies with xi, so we have this variation. So with all uh, three coordinate axes, we have these variations of x, y and z, and we find out the total derivatives. Now we can combine them in matrix form and relate the partial derivatives with respect to xi, eta, zeta to the partial derivatives with respect to x, y and z. And these are the partial derivatives of x, y and z with respect to xi, eta and zeta. So as we know, x, y and z, they are known functions of xi, eta and zeta by virtue of parametric mapping. So these partial derivatives, this matrix of partial derivatives can be evaluated, and this is the transformation matrix. This relates x, y and z to xi, eta, zeta. So this is also known as the Jacobian matrix of transformation from xi, eta, zeta coordinates to x, y and z coordinates. So the partial derivatives with respect to xi, eta, zeta, they are given as this Jacobian matrix multiplied by partial derivatives with respect to x, y and z. Now the what we have is actually we can evaluate these partial derivatives, and we need these partial derivatives. Partial derivatives with respect to x, y and z is what is required, right? And we can readily compute these partial derivatives with respect to xi, eta and zeta. So what we can do, and this Jacobian matrix is of course a known function, so we also know this J matrix. So what can be done is this partial derivatives with respect to Cartesian coordinates is simply equal to J inverse multiplied by these partial derivatives, right? So with this mapping, x is equal to sigma xi ni, y is equal to sigma yi ni, and z is equal to sigma zi ni. These define the mapping of local coordinates onto Cartesian coordinates, and J is known as the Jacobian matrix of this local to Cartesian coordinate transformation. And all this is known. J is known, J can be evaluated, and partial derivatives with respect to local coordinates can be easily evaluated. So Jacobian matrix can be computed by using the nodes of the distortion, by using making use of the interpolation model, and once this is evaluated for any specific mapping, then it can be inverted, and the partial derivative with respect to Cartesian coordinates can be given in terms of partial derivatives in terms of the local coordinates. Now the only requirement here is that this J inverse of the Jacobian should exist, and that is where that means it has to be positive definite. So this mapping exists only when, as long as this Jacobian of transformation is a positive definite matrix, right? And this inverse exists. So an alternate way of saying that is determinant of this Jacobian should be greater than 0 anywhere in the domain. That's the implication of this positive definiteness of the Jacobian matrix of transformation. So this is an indication, and that is what it means, that every single point in xi, eta, zeta coordinate has a corresponding unique representation in x, y, z map. So as long as there is a one-to-one correspondence between each point in parent element in terms of xi, eta, zeta coordinates and corresponding point in the distorted shape in x, y, z coordinate system, this Jacobian matrix is going to be positive definite. But if the distortions are too severe in the sense that one element actually bends over half of the element, bends over the other, for example, you may look at this uh, phase. I mean, this is the parent element, and if I uh, bend it over like this, then it is a case of severe distortion, because for two values of xi eta, I will be having multiple values, at least two values of in xy coordinate system, right? So this is an extensive, this is an very uh, what should I say, violent distortion. So it xi eta coordinate, I mean this regular square face is distorted into such shape that one half overlaps onto the other half. So now we have same coordinates, 2 points with same xy coordinates mapped onto two different uh, points in the parent element with two different xi eta coordinates. So when that happens, then the Jacobian will be not positive definite. Jacobian of the transformation matrix will be negative. And then that Cartesian coordinate derivatives is, it is not possible to evaluate in terms of the Jacobian of the transformation. So that is what is meant by using moderate distortion. We need to ensure that for every single point in the parent element in xi, eta, zeta coordinate system, there corresponds only one point in the distorted domain in x, y and z uh, system, coordinate system. So once the transformation is done, the domain of integration can be transformed to a regular bounded domain, that is d omega, that is given by dx, dy, dz is equal to determinant of the Jacobian multiplied by d xi, d eta, d zeta. And both, all three, xi, eta, zeta, the coordinates, the limits of integration are changed to whatever the irregular domain, distorted domain has, to the very neat and tidy range of -1 to +1. And once the integrand is in terms of xi, eta and zeta, limits of integration are from -1 to +1, the Gaussian quadrature comes into play, and very efficiently the entire integrand can be evaluated by just sampling the integrand at different points with respect to at sampling points in xi, eta, zeta, and accumulating the sums. So integrands in terms of Cartesian coordinates can be transformed in terms of local coordinates by appropriate substitution of parametric mapping. So wherever we have x, y, z, they can be written in terms of xi, eta, zeta, and the integrands can be substituted. And then the domain integral can be evaluated. Integrand gx as a function of x, y, z integrated in x, y, z domain can be transformed into an integrand in terms of xi, eta, zeta, and integrated between -1 to +1 for all three uh, local coordinates xi, eta, and zeta. And this definite integral, multiple integral in -1 to +1 range, can be approximated by Gaussian quadrature by triple sum using weighted sum of integrands sampled at sampling points of requisite order, and that is the standard form of Gauss-Legendre numerical quadrature that we have already seen before. So once we have this integral, domain integral, then obviously the problem is solved. I mean, we can evaluate the domain integral and establish the equilibrium equations. Now the only fact remains, I mean, this domain integral is fine. Now the only challenge remains is how do we deal with the boundary integral. So boundary integrals also represent the similar issue. We already discussed that boundary integral, we reduce it to one-dimensional integral in case of two-dimensional domains. For three-dimensional domains, we reduce it to area integral by using appropriate transformation of variables. So the same principle, same concept is used here, and that can be evaluated easily. So evaluation of domain integral, just a recapitulation of Gauss-Legendre quadrature. An n-point Gauss-Legendre quadrature can integrate exactly a polynomial of degree 2n minus 1. The coefficients n xi, n eta, n zeta, they denote the order of quadrature along respective coordinate directions, although usually we make use of same order of quadrature in all coordinate directions in practice. But if required, different coordinate directions can have different orders of integration if the situation so demands. The choice of an appropriate order of quadrature is very important in finite element computations. While using a high order quadrature rule ensures accuracy of numerical computations at the cost of a significant increase in computational costs, choice of a low order quadrature, very low order quadrature, leads to numerical instability. A very interesting discussion. You will find communicable instabilities because of numerical integration in the book by Zinkevich. I strongly advocate to all of you to advise all of you to please have a look at that discussion in Zinkevich's book. The desired order of quadrature rule is the one which facilitates exact evaluation, same as analytical integration, of the elements of element stiffness matrix, that is B transpose dB, when element is in regular or undistorted shape. So that means J is equal to 1. So X is equal to same as I, Y is same as eta, and Z is same as zeta. So when you are dealing with undistorted domain, so whatever is the highest order of polynomial term that you have in this product B transpose dB, and what is the Gauss-Legendre quadrature order to integrate that degree of polynomial, that would be the uh, full integration, full quadrature order that will be required, that should be used for evaluating the domain integrals in the distorted domains. Right? So in the case of 4-node rectangle, the integrand B transpose dB involves second degree polynomial terms, as B comprises constants and linear polynomial terms, and product of B transpose dB, that will have quadratic variation. So 2 by 2 quadrature rule is necessary, 2 along x, 2 along xi, and 2 along eta, to exactly integrate the second degree polynomial terms in the integrand. Similarly, integrand involves fourth degree polynomial terms in the case of 8-node serendipity elements, and that requires a 3 by 3 quadrature rule for exact integration. And this order of quadrature is referred to as full integration or full quadrature rule. Similar formulations for numerical integration of transformed integrands can be developed for regular and triangular and tetrahedron regions in terms of the local coordinates, that is using area coordinates or volume coordinates, as we had already seen. Local coordinates for triangular region, they vary from 0 to 1, and they are amenable to be used as a local coordinate system for defining the geometry, and similarly the numerical integrations can be defined in terms of local coordinates in case of triangular and tetrahedral region in the same fashion as for rectangle and hexahedral elements. So I'll stop here now. If there are any questions.